Now, let's look at the key concerns in African women theologies. Key concerns. We shall look at Christology, soteriology, anthropology, hospitality, among other concerns. Let's look at one by one. First, we look at Christology, African women Christology. African women theologians' view of Christology. Now, I start by saying that the word Christology is derived from two Greek words, or two words, Christ and logy. So that's English now, not even Greek, which is nothing but study about Christ, or listening about. It's all about listening about Christ. It literally means the study about Christ or reasoning about Christ and activities. If you talk of in Africa, with African women or in Africa, Oduyoye defines it simply as a recent account of what the word Christ stands for. Yes, in light of African women, what does the word Christ stand for? In other words, we are attempting to the question that Jesus Christ once asked his disciples in Luke 9:18-21. Who do people say I am? Or who do you say I am? So African women theologians are asking the same question. Who is Christ to us as African women? That is their question. In Oduyoye's view, Mercy Oduyoye's view, Mercy, Christology for African women is the story of Jesus who saves, the one who brings and lives good news. She further asserts that we cannot ignore the African religion in seeking to articulate Christology. Similarly, Teresa Suga, quoted in Mercy Oduyoye's book, Introducing African Women Theologies, 2001, page 58, she says, that is Teresa Suga, says that Christology cannot be formulated without taking into account women and their place in church and society. To this end, I agree with Oduyoye, Mercy Oduyoye, when she says that Christology is not meant to analyze the nature of Christ, but to identify his saving acts and to cling in hope of liberation, and that it is to celebrate the victories of a denomination at death and to attribute this to Jesus rather than other powers, rather than try to patriarchalize matters. He says the focus should be on Christ himself rather than those other powers that want to earn credit. It can be male dominance anyway, better attribute victories to Jesus himself, not individual prayers who are mainly men. On the whole, African women's Christology's concerns include patriarchalization of Christology, clericalism as propounded by sexist members of our society, and the need to focus on the motherly attributes of Christ. So their Christology has a lot of motherly attributes, where they don't look at just Jesus as a father, but now Jesus is, in his motherly attributes. There's a lot of things that are motherly in Christ, including washing disciples' feet, including feeding the 5,000. They would focus on those things and trying to show that there is a lot of motherliness in Christ than even fatherliness. Quite a number of issues that we will consider another time. And let me now talk about African women's understanding of God. In general, African women in African women's theology are trying to argue liberatively and reconstructively for a case where God, the one we worship, is seen and understood as neither man or a woman, So that's another number two, African women understanding of God. They argue we should not focus on God as a man too much the way we do. Let us think of man as God is neither man, neither woman, spirit. God is spirit. In other words, God has no gender according to African women. In so doing, they are trying or they are tracing various backgrounds that might have led to patriarchal dominance in understanding God and seeking a way forward. You see, all the time, God associated with masculinity. Okay, the Almighty. Yeah, there's too much of it. And it creates an impression that is the way, even when masculinity is misused in African indigenous society, and then you have converted to Christianity, you feel like it should continue, that masculinity. Rosemary Ruether, a feminist theologian from the West, but very critical in understanding African women theology. She is a lady, Rosemary Ruether. In her publication in 1983, contends that since God is male and female and neither male nor female, one needs inclusive language for God that draws on the images and experiences of both genders. For her, this inclusiveness can happen only by naming God, or should we say goddess, in female as well as male metaphors. Her views are in line with Oduyoye, Mercy Oduyoye, in her 2001 publication, she feels that most of Africa has no images of God. So where there are no gender-specific pronouns, it has been insisted that God is supra-gender. As another scholar called Abe, in the 2001 publication notes, Ata na Nyonmo, which means Father, Mother, and God. Ata na Nyonmo, the Ga name in Ghana for God. They always call God Ata, which means Father, and then Na means Mother, and then God. Nyonmo, Nyonmo. So God is never called just God, but it is Father, Mother, and God. We pray that you bless us. So you can see how interesting it is. It is Atanya, Atana Nyonmo, Father, Mother, and God, among the Ga of Ghana, where Abe, this scholar Abe, comes from. She argues that Atana Nyonmo is perhaps the most significant as far as a balanced and holistic concept of God is concerned. If we must use anthropocentric names, or names where you use human names to describe God, if we must do that, then let us have Father, Mother, and God. Ata na Nyonmo, when talking about God. Otherwise, just trying to make God appear man and create an impression to a growing child that God is just a man, and woman that looks inferior in that arrangement, it doesn't argue well. For according to Abe, it speaks of God neither exclusively as Father nor as Mother, but it takes the whole humanity into account. In any case, when we look at the images of the goddess in her various forms in ancient text, that is the year 2800 to 1200 BC or BCE, we discover a world whose dialectics do not fall into dualisms. Specifically, the concept of gender complementarity is absent from the ancient myths. For the goddess and God are equivalent, not complementary images of the divine. In attempting to answer why the motherhood of God has not influenced Ghanaian Christian theology, as in the case of the Ga people, scholar Ambe attributes this to the problem of Christian mission and colonialism. She rightly contends that the motherhood of God could not influence African Christianity because the missionaries to Africa in the 19th century did not take seriously the cultures of the people of Africa. Yeah, they just assumed Africa is just patriarchal. We don't have the guy who incorporate father, mother when describing God, not just God as a father. They were not keen on that. That's the missionaries. For to the missionaries, it was inconceivable that Africa would have anything to contribute to the enrichment of Christianity. All African ideas were thought to be so irreligious and superstitious that for Christianity to flourish, these ideas had to be put to rest. We now come to another area called African ecclesiology, African women's ecclesiology. How do they understand the church? What is a church to African women theologians? In African women theology, what is ecclesia? Ecclesia means church. The study of the church is called ecclesiology. So first, what is ecclesiology? We can define it. The word ecclesiology is derived from two Greek words, ecclesia and logos. Ecclesia means the church, while logos mean word or reason. It literally means the study about the church or reasoning about the church. To this end, Rosemary Ruether's definition of the church as a place where the good news of liberation from sexism is preached, where the Spirit is present to empower us to renounce patriarchy, where a community committed to the new life of mutuality is gathered together and nurtured, and where the community is spreading this vision and struggle to others. That is Rosemary Ruether, who sees that the church should be a liberating institution. It should be a communalistic institution. It should be a liberator from sexism, and it should be the place where preaching should be geared towards liberating women and getting them to the right positions in society. That is how she sees it. But let me also look at what they are saying about their exclusion in decision making when they are in the church. That is one. They are excluded according to various publications by women theologians, African women theologians. Exclusion from decision making. That's one of the concerns. Women who are the majority in the church and form the backbone of the church are usually excluded from decision making. As that's Pottigieta in her publication, who argues on discrimination. Isabel Piri notes that they have been conditioned to look up to men only for leadership. The conditioning, psychological conditioning is it is women who should offer leadership. Where there is only women, it is like there's a gap there. An impression is created, there's something missing. This results in women being treated as junior partners rather than as daughters of God's house. Thus, women are underrepresented in all the decision-making bodies of our churches in African society today. They are excluded at all levels, and even their condition of service needs further review, according to Isabel Piri. Yeah, there is something else on ecclesiology, African women ecclesiology. They are concerned with is called clericalism. What do you mean? Then do they mean by clericalism? By definition, the rule of clericalism disempowers the people and turns them into laity, dependent on clergy. It assumes that people have no direct access to God. Yet the doctrine of the priesthood of all believers makes everybody a priest. You can baptize every Christian can baptize in times of emergency. Everybody can intercede through to God. It's not just the Levites. But clericalism gives the impression that only clergy can mediate or intercede for others. So It is for the clergy to authorize theological training. Who should train in theological institution? Who should preach? Who should teach? Who should administer the sacraments? All that's Potigieta's possession. Look how Potigieta looked at it in her publication 1986. This clericalism is built upon patriarchy, as evidenced by the fact that it continues to exclude women even in lay leadership roles. They are even where there is no need for clerics. There is a sense of exclusion, according to various scholars, Rueda, Potigieta, and others. The other concern within African women ecclesiology, or study of church in the perspective of women in African scholarship, is violence. As Mercy Oduyoye says, the image of the church as a caring community is tarnished by its tardiness in confronting violence against women. So the church is not vocal enough to say the enough is enough. Obviously, Mercy Oduyoye doesn't address the violence against men, which is now coming these days. There's a pocket of men being battered by women, particularly the drunkard, careless men. Some had water burnt with hot water. All those things have been appearing, especially the Kenyan context of the game changing. The game changing now, it's men. Now, violence takes many forms. That is psychological violence. Women are talking about all these for women theologians and scholars of religion. They are talking about these forms of violence. And they say it takes many forms. Psychological violence is bad. The threatening of women ministers is violence in itself. According to Njoroge, this is Nyambura Njoroge in her publication 1986. Sacking those who dissent is another form of violence. If you disagree with the big man, you are sacked. That is a form of violence towards women. There are cases reported of such things. Writing warning letters. Peter talks of writing warning letters to women who are working in religious institutions. That is violence. Yes, that's a form of violence. There is also another form of violence, sexual violence. It's there. There's also physical violence, and the church is quiet. You can see this fellow was battered, and it's not an issue. We just continue with our programs as usual. Life continues. There is also marginalization, is also a form of violence. Demeaning of women is among other forms of violence, among others. This is according to studies in African women theology, which we are trying to present to you here. All these are common in the African church. Nyambura Njoroge, coming back to her, contends that the training that the church offers does not prepare one to minister to prostitutes, the victims of domestic violence, and the victims of sexual harassment in the workplace, nor to the wealthy with their deep spiritual needs. So it's a form of violence when you prepare a syllabus to support Nyambura Njoroge that does not prepare the trainee to minister to people who matter most, people whom God so much loved. Victims of domestic violence, people who are in prostitution, people who are victims of sexual harassment. You are not prepared. Oh, the wealthy, they have a lot of problems. Yes, the rich also cry. No one knows how to minister to them. They are good because they come with their money. They are just good. You are not prepared to minister to big people, senior politicians. It's a form of violence. Now, within the African women ecclesiology, which has quite a number of themes that are touching to us, is now another issue is ordination. In the African women ecclesiology, Peary says that external influences have negatively affected the African church with regard to ordination of women. For example, in the Anglican Church of Malawi, there's one by name Reverend R.S. Hunter, who argued strongly that there is no need to ordain women, and the argument was on the basis of maintaining what was the tradition of the very first Anglican missions. If those missionaries of the 19th century did not ordain women, why are we ordaining? That was Reverend Hunter's argument. His views were in total disregard of the context, which is the Chewa Anglican Christians of Malawi, where there is even matriarchal society. Women talk more in Chewa, the largest community in Malawi, and it's still in Zambia. It's not a patriarchal where men rule like most of these Kenyan. The Chewa are matriarchal society where women have more say. And now they say, let us only ordain men. Why should you ordain somebody? Anyway, I don't want to say the person who is powerless at home, but I'm saying that they should have considered the Chewa context where women have more voice. The argument further, Hunter's argument that women should not be ordained on matters to do with the historical flow of things, that argument failed to put into consideration the present needs of the contemporary situation, which amounts to a serious challenge of Christianity in Africa of the 21st century. Now, if you look at the present, the contemporary situation, we are educating all of them. The same schools paying even more. If that is the case, then a lot of things must change because we are talking of context which was different from the one we are in. The last thing on the topic of African women ecclesiology for consideration, because these are only summaries, is symbols. I quote this great scholar, Sharon Potgieta, a South African scholar. She contends that, like other feminists, she is no longer comfortable in the church, for its symbols have become meaningless. Rosemary Radford Ruther feels that these patriarchal symbols and the hierarchical relationships of the ministry to the laity are still taken as normative. Women are however, allowed in a small way to integrate themselves into this male-defined and dominated role, and they too adopt the same titles whenever they get ordained, such as Reverend. You hear them are called Bishop Rose, Moderator Jane, the Archbishop Joyce, the Very Reverend Mary, the Right Reverend Canon so and so, without questioning the suitability of these titles. Were they made for women? Were they meant for women anyway? That is what Rosemary Ruther and Sharon Potgieta in their publications are pushing us to ask. Were they initially meant for women? Did they have women in mind when they came forth? They too stand in the pulpit when given a chance without sometimes questioning the symbolism of the pulpit in an African setting. In areas where some are ordained, they too wear the clerical collar and the clerical gowns without questioning their symbolism. You see, are they now getting swallowed in the world of men without question? Can they cut? Is it possible to cut out a way in which you distinguish between an ordained African man and an ordained African woman? Those are very critical questions from scholars, that they sink into those symbolisms without even asking and tracing the backgrounds of these titles. Can we have another name for a woman archbishop? Another name, another title for a woman very reverend, a woman right reverend, a woman canon, a woman moderator, a woman bishop? Are they entering the domains of men with eyes wide open? Are they going to the fire with eyes wide open? Those are concerns for scholars. It's only for scholarship. Don't go to ask in your home church there. You'll be thrown away. This is for scholarship only. And of course, you can implement where it is possible. After thorough, proper meetings, relevant bodies can see what to change. Now, another topic as we wind up, as move towards conclusion, is African women's anthropology. This is a long topic. African women's anthropology highlights the patriarchal nature of women's survival in Africa. In particular, it highlights the patriarchal structures that have been created by one gender from time immemorial to institutionalize the alleged inferiority of women before men. For example, there are a lot of stereotypical generalizations that have been passed over from one generation to the other. They include to be born a female child is inferior status. Another stereotype, women are Eve incarnate. Another one, a girl child is a little piece of property. Another stereotype, women are entitled to men. Another one, men and women are not equal. Another stereotype, God ordained the inferiority of women. Another bad stereotype, no women, no cry. Of course, that's Bob Marley. Another one, sin in the world is a result of women. Another one, women are fragile. They are fragile like an egg. They can break easily. Another one, women cannot make good leaders, cannot lead. Women are dangerous when they are given instruments of power, among others. Of course, some of these things are overtaken by time because people have seen they were not truthful, they were not accurate. They were just meant to keep somebody somewhere at a certain level. These are anthropological socializations, the way we do things anthropologically. You know, anthropology is study of man or humanity. So how we socialize people. So it's the patriarchal anthropology, which is too much. So African women's anthropology, as a study of full humanity of women, also addresses some of the issues that adversely affect women more negatively than their male counterparts. They include polygamy. It affects poorly women more than it does men in the negative sense. Even marriage, sometimes it affects women negatively more than it does to men. There is also divorce, which confuses them, especially when they are children. Yes, yeah, some communities, a woman goes with the children to where? And the man marries again and gets more children in the other. See the confusion. We have so many cases, even locally, we know about. There's also domestic violence that affects women more. There's also childlessness. There's also barrenness, where women are harassed for barrenness, and sometimes it's not their fault. There's also widowhood. There are cases where they are harassed when the spouse dies and they're accused of murdering and killing or bewitching or anything. There's also prostitution. It is blamed on some, but it's done by both. There's also division of labor, where some areas are kept for certain inferior people, among other issues that are there in African women's anthropology. When we socialize, look at the humanity of women, we find all those things keep coming. That is anthropology of African women. It also seeks to highlight the strategies for women in addressing some of these issues. There are strategies to overcome. In their very many writings, there is too much they have written as very good. In particular, Rosemary Ruether, some call her Ruether, R-U-E-T-H-E-R, Ruether, traces background of patriarchal Christianity that came to dominate the Christian church in classical orthodoxy, and argues that it never went so far as to completely deny women's participation in the image of God. However, she contends that churchmen came to regard women as bearers of sin. Interestingly, patriarchal theology regarded women to be more apt to sin, more quick to sin, and as lesser spirituality. Spiritually, women are portrayed as lesser or smaller, and quick to sinning. You know, they are easily to tempt. You know, that's the patriarchal theology. That's how it shows, which is very unfair. As an inferior being, it was held that a woman couldn't represent the image of God fully as a man can do. Further, man was to regard a woman as representing part of himself that must be repressed and kept under control by reason to prevent a fall into sin and dishonor. In other words, the fall of humanity in Genesis 3 led to the wrong conclusion that women have inferior nature and they should continue under punishment for that original sin. It appears that the coming of Christ, his death and resurrection, did not undo the quagmire that feminism found itself in. As Ruther, or Rosemary Ruther, further says, this pattern of patriarchal anthropology can be illustrated in the entire line of classical Christian theology, from ancient to modern times. In this regard, the example of St. Augustine best illustrates this. As the classical source of patriarchal anthropology, he held that even though a woman can attain salvation, she still remains inferior. She is sin prone. She is only secondarily in the image of God, not primarily in the image of God, while the male normatively possesses the image of God primarily. That is St. Augustine, very respected in these shows, scholar, spiritual, theologian, great man after St. Paul. In church history, is a very respected man, St. Augustine, but you see how he was so patriarchal. Similarly, the 16th century Reformation strengthened the views of the classical Orthodox with regard to women in the church and the society in general. In particular, Martin Luther, the reformer of the 16th century, held that in the original creation, Eve was equal to Adam, but after the fall in Genesis 3, things changed. She is now subject to man as her superior, as a punishment for her sin, an expression of divine justice. According to Martin Luther, you see now, even Martin Luther the Great went on to repeat that patriarchal anthropology. Even within the African continent, African women theologians have been conscientizing the society that being born a girl child, has been seen as inferior status. For example, among the Igbo of Nigeria, a girl was little more than a piece of property, according to Massey Oduyoye 2001 publication. Now, such stereotype has been institutionalized in Africa for years and years. It is no wonder that there are reported cases where women have had a fatal resignation to the status that are prescribed by men in their respective societies. Esther Akoratse's definition of sin as the refusal of the self to be the self it was meant to be is worth being considered as a fitting description that will be used as a working definition in this section. That she defines sin as the refusal of the self to be the self it was meant to be. It's a sin. That is the real sin to God. When you refuse to be what you are supposed to be, you do the right thing the right way and the right time. That's a sin. This is evident in our Christian society in various ways. For example, the refusal to accept the Imago Dei in everyone is a case in point. In the church, the refusal to ordain women after years and years is a clear point of sin. The refusal to be the self we were meant to be is a sin before God, according to Esther Akoratse, and we agree with it. Cases have been seen where women surrender to patriarchy whenever a small threat is issued. That simple surrender is a sin because you are supposed to fight harder. You must be assertive. That's a way. When you are doing the right thing, be assertive. You cannot just withdraw after one bell goes. After one bell goes, you resign and give up. That's a sin, because according to Esther Akoratse, the refusal to be the self you are meant to be is a sin on its own. When you hear someone say, after all, we are women, let's withdraw, let's not fight with the men. It's not a fight, it's a question of putting yourself at the right place. So that's a sin now to withdraw so quickly. Yes. The failure of the society to raise to the question, to the occasion, to rise up to the occasion, to stand up to the occasion, and address teething problems eating away the society, such as HIV and AIDS, polygamy, prostitution, widowhood, domestic violence, and stereotypes that have underpinned women, among other issues, is tantamount to the self's refusal to be the self it was meant by God Almighty to be. Thus, Akoratse is right. Esther Akoratse is right in saying that if sin constitutes missing the mark of our true humanity, and we are serious about corrective measures to bring us to full humanity, then we are better for naming it and finding hearing for it. This is a call for entire Africa, a challenge to break the silence on gender disparities, whether it is men being battered, women being battered. Let us speak it out, and speaking it out will save the society even further and further. That will be more helpful than keeping quiet and assuming all will be well. Thus, so that is it. That's a challenge. We must tackle the sin of inability to appropriate our God-given freedom, as it is the case in modern Africa with regard to gender issues. We better rename the sin and say the sin is silence when we should be talking. Now, the other topic is African women hospitality, another issue that features when you do other studies I've done about women theologies. When you put all their books on the table and you do other study, you also find this is a major area concern in African women theology. So in African women hospitality, we know hospitality is inherently an African phenomenon, but you'll be surprised how women hospitality is misused. Yes, you'll be surprised. It is really misused. Of course, hospitality is inherent in being an African. We welcomed even strangers outside Africa. Some became inhospitable to us. Some even did very harm to us. Some colonized us. Some enslaved us. That's history now. We continue being hospitable because God is hospitable. From ancient times, we have to be like God. Whether we are in African religion or in Christianity or in the religion, God is hospitable. God is caring. God is loving. God is loving. So let me say this about hospitality as inherent to Africa. Now, African women's theology stresses that hospitality is inherent in being African. As Mercy Oduyoye, 2001, says of herself, and consequently speaks for us all, I quote, God never forgets a deed of hospitality. That is my faith as an African, end of quote. This is evidence. I can affirm this. Mercy Oduyoye's comment by saying that this is evidenced by the refugee crisis in Africa. So many refugees and migrants and stateless persons, people who are stateless there, for homes are still open to them despite the risk involved in keeping somebody from a fighting country. He may come with his gun and bomb your home. You don't know whether he's a criminal posing as a genuine refugee, but being hospitable, you can be misused. And Africans remain hospitable despite the risk. Various sayings such as, better to lose your money than to lose your human relations. Another one, doing as the ancestors handed down to Africans, and so on and so forth. They strengthen the inherent nature of being hospitable in Africa as an inherent practice. Hospitality has or was a moral law. Yes, it's a law, like a constitution. It's a law in ancient Africa, and the modern African Christian thinking. It is not only seen to be at the core of African traditional spirituality or indigenous spirituality, but more importantly, in the African Christian spirituality. Thus, hospitality is a way of life in Africa, from family or among friends. In the family level, even children without parents are taken care of by others. That means that the concept of hospitality will continue to inform our eschatology in Africa, our future, quest for future with God and with whoever. The concept of hospitality will feature always. Okay? For as we look upon the last day, even some say the day of the Lord, siku ya Bwana, our acts of hospitality will have to continue as part of the journey. So that's part of our journey, whether we are Africans or indigenous peoples, the concept of hospitality is there. Within hospitality, let's look at Mary, the mother of Jesus. The Roman Catholics prefer to call her Theotokos, or Mother of God. Theo means God, Tokos, Mother of God, Theotokos. Now, African women theologians stresses that women are linked in a special way to hospitality in that Mary, the mother of Jesus, hosted God. Hence, she is Theotokos, meaning the mother of God. This indicates that the concept of hospitality is very dear to women, given the high honor of hosting God through Mary. African women have therefore placed much emphasis on the subject of hospitality, since they see it as the mark of divinity and therefore something to which human beings should aspire. That's why in their writings they observe Oduyoye observes, they tell of experiences of hospitality. They tell about experiences of hospitality that makes them feel less than human. Yeah, that act of inhospitality, those aspects of inhospitality from other people makes them feel that if you are not hospitable, you are less than human. If you have uburuane or unyama and not ubuntu, or you have no human concern, you are less than human being. And you see, this act of hosting God through Mary in African women theology, particularly those leaning in the Catholic wing, it is a great thing that cannot fail to be underlined, or it cannot escape our attention. It can't escape our attention. So you can go on and say treating women or girls as merchandise or merchandise, gifts, women as gifts and means of cementing relationships between men feels less than human. You make them less human. Okay? That's no hospitality there. That is inhospitality. In the African indigenous setting, chiefs will say give girls to other chiefs to cement good neighborliness, something which African women theologians rightly feel is misplaced hospitality. That goes contrary to the inspiration given by Mary. When men in Africa stop getting their daughters from school and forcing them to marry their creditors or friends as gestures of misplaced hospitality, then the inspiration that Mary gives to humanity will turn out to a reality in the global perspective and in our respective situations. At the moment, hospitality is used, that is seen in Mary as Theotokos, is abused. Something else is to comment on hospitality as a way of life. African women theology asserts that the way to represent or the way to present ourselves is, and that which will give us future is through nothing but hospitality. Not to abuse hospitality, but to institutionalize the culture of hospitality, which is inherently in African indigenous society and also in the faith, the Christian faith, and many other faiths. They look at eschatology with regard to the continuity and strengthening of hospitality, working out areas that tend to pervert the cause of justice to everyone. In particular, Nyambura Njoroge identifies generosity, mutuality, reciprocity, and caring as a central principle of community building in Africa. Mercy Oduyoye cites the case of Jesus of Nazareth, whose ministry was highly boosted by the hospitality from those who shared his vision. Hospitality goes hand in hand with sacrifice as a way of life. Now, sacrifice is associated with the cross and suffering for African women's theology. It is for that reason that Nyambura Njoroge points out that a caring and compassionate Jesus traveled the path towards Golgotha, not to perpetuate crucifixion, but to bring them to an end. Thus, hospitality is a way of life through which we can be able to relate with the doctrine of the last days, that is eschatology. So the future is hospitality. Yes, that is what will mark the real end, if not the beginning. Yeah. So it can be associated with reciprocity, caring, as a principle of community building in Africa. And it's not to be misused. That is the concern of African women theologians. The other one we talk about is spirituality of hope within hospitality. The resurrection of the body is used as an image for dealing with African women's spirituality of hope. For as they argue, it was women who were determined to do honor to the body. It was women who were entrusted with the message of hope that said, death does not have the last word. Now, that's Oduyoye 2001. Resurrection strengthens them as they focus on the eschaton, the last day, which is informed by the present time in regard to our relation with our neighbors. This victory over death is an assurance that led God's an unerring spirit, and that they shall not stray in the desert, nor miss their providential way. So African women's spirituality should therefore be seen as a way of uncovering and advocating women's true humanity. That is, humanity with hospitality. So you can see right from the resurrection, you can see the women were the first to honor the body, to give honor. They were the one entrusted with the message of hope. He is resurrected. Okay, that the death has no last word. That's Oduyoye is showing us how strong they view the spirituality of hope. They are still the bearers of hope. They are custodians of hope. Women are symbols of hope according to this position, because they were and they are and they will be. That is what she sees of African women as the hope for Africa. Concerning eschatology now, eschatology is the teaching on the last time or the end times. It's a science to do with the end times. And you see, St. Paul says that in the last days there will be trumpet. The dead will rise up, they will resurrect or something. That idea of eschatology, the last day, the last end, the end of things, the study of the end of things. It is there in African religion, it's there in all religions. Eschatology is a study. For African women's theologians, and to a large extent for many Africans, eschatology focuses on the fullness and fruitfulness of life here in this land of the living. So it doesn't start at the very end, it starts here. To prepare the end, you have to do something now. That means Our present hospitality is very important in our African eschatology, for we do not focus on the last things blindly. We also focus on the present things without due regard, with due regard to that future. So the present shape up the future. So the study of eschatology is shaped up by what we are doing today. And that's why even Quest Dixon, an West African theologian, says in African indigenous religion, not everybody becomes an ancestor, which is an office, which is a promotion to the world of the living. You live permanently as an ancestral spirit. It is only given to those who lead exemplary, lives. So if you lead a reckless life, a life of hatred, causing problems, you don't become an ancestor, an ancestral spirit, and be mediating between God and humanity. You will not be a living spirit. This also means it is in line with Christ's teaching in the Lord's Prayer for us to seek the kingdom of God, to come here on earth as it is done in heaven. That is Matthew 6. Rosemary Radford Ruether, in her 1983 publication, traces the background of eschatological thought, the whole idea of the last time, eschatological thought, in ancient Near Eastern culture, and explains that they saw the cycles of renewal of nature as a key to the constant hope for renewed life, resurrected from drought and death. The ancient gods and goddesses were not outside, but within this struggle for life against death. Their eschatology, like in the African case, was informed by the present situation. That is, they expressed their hope for renewed rains and fertility of the land, bountiful crops, and healthy offspring for human and animal, and more importantly, for peace, social order, justice, security against outside enemies, and good rulers who would protect the poor and liberate the captive. Now, this further agrees with the concept of African hospitality and African eschatological thinking, as the previous discussion has shown. So you can see how deep-rooted the whole idea of being hospitable is all about, and how eschatology was seen by the present hospitable activities that restores people's fertility, people's wealth, people's success. So it starts here. And African women are urging that, women theology are urging that there must be hospitality to everyone, not hostility to a girl child or whoever. It should be hospitality to everyone. Now, the other point is childlessness. It is logical to concur with Oduyoye again. She's a key person. Her view, Mercy Oduyoye, that African women's creative literature is replete with what has come to be named as the child factor. Perhaps we should add a voice and say that African society in general is replete with the child factor. That makes a childless couple to be pitied or even sympathized with, as was the case with Oduyoye herself. Her views on the plight of childless women, who is sometimes ridiculed, abused, insulted, and mocked, is a clear case of inhospitality, uburuane, as opposed to hospitality, ubuntu. So being hostile to a childless woman and blaming her, not blaming men or man or the other way around, is inhospitable. And Africa is full of that kind of inhospitality to childless women. Yet, everybody before God is important. You are not important because you have children. You are important. You are image of God. Whether you have children, you have a family, you are a single mother, you are married, you are not married, you belong to God. But family is very important in God's schema of life. In God's planning, family of man, woman is very important to continue and to learn harmoniously. To this end, it is imperative to concur with her, that is Mercy Amba Oduyoye's assertion that children are gifts from God, and therefore When God fails to give children to some women, they should not be discriminated against. Indeed, they are part of God's hospitality. And as we know it, in Africa, hospitality is never demanded. Otherwise, demanding hospitality may amount to corruption or never know something very immoral. When you tell people, be hospitable to me, yeah. It's never demanded. It looks immoral. Another one is now again back to abuse of African hospitality. How is African hospitality abused? Now, I say this. The sincerity of African hospitality has from time to time been abused. It has been exploited right from the time of slavery and slave trade, colonialism, and even neocolonialism. A story is told of the great South African settler from Britain, Cecil Rhodes, in the 19th century. It is said that he was dying of cancer while he was in Europe, his homeland. Modern medication by then had been tried on him with no or very little success. It turned out that in the end, adverse weather conditions in Europe were worsening his condition. It was suggested that he should be taken to Africa due to its warm, habitable climate. On arrival in South Africa, the local people received him, as usual, with warm African hospitality. In addition, they gave him their traditional medicine, and he healed quickly. When he tried to give tokens to the African healers, African herbalists, African doctors, African medicine men, they refused. They refused the tokens from Cecil Rhodes. They told him, or they argued that their services were not for sale or they are for human welfare. Theirs is Ubuntu. You do it not to earn, but to do it also to build others. As he grew stronger, started recovering, he started grabbing huge chunks of land as Africans helplessly watched. This was a clear abuse of this inherent hospitality. Cecil Rhodes was not the only European who enjoyed African hospitality. There is Henry Stanley, there is Samuel Baker, the explorers, and many others who are notable examples. Unfortunately, those who were explorers went back to Europe to report negatively on this hospitality. Although maybe they saw foolishness. False information was passed on to the people in Europe that almost made the rest of the world to equate Africans with beasts. And that was very, very sad. Something else. Now, a critique. As we wind up, let's look at the critique of African women's theologies. African women's theology is a reconstructive theology of the post-colonial Africa. We'll find its litmus test if it projects itself as exclusively a women affair or a women theology only. In an era of inclusivity, it will pay dividends if men and women will get concerned with the plight of African women who have borne the pains of living in a patriarchal society from time immemorial. Yeah, many people, men inclusive, are hurt by the patriarchy they saw when their mothers were humiliated just because they are women by their fathers who are their husbands. So women, if they create an impression, they are the wearer of the shoe, they know where it pinches, and no other person who was not wearing or doesn't wear their shoe knows, that will be a tragedy. That will be a major weakness in it. In an era of inclusivity, it will pay dividends if men and women will get concerned with the plight of African women who have borne the pains of living in a patriarchal society from that time that you can't count. Certainly, the struggle to deconstruct patriarchy is an every person's business. Indeed, injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. And joy to one is joy to all. Injury to one is injury to all. So it is not an injury to women, it's an injury to Africans, people. And we should all together work to fix errors. My position on this is driven partly by the African customs of wholeness, where one person's injury is an injury to for all. And as the African saying goes, ngare ingatagwo ni mundu na muthoniwe. That is, a charging leopard is correctively chased out of the village by that man, that gentleman, and his in-laws, mainly referring to men. The in-laws did not interact so closely. But when an enemy like a leopard attacked the village, that gentleman and the in-laws will intermingle and fight the leopard together. They will forget cultural dictates that you keep a distance from Adoni or the in-laws. In this case, a leopard, metaphorically speaking, in the name of indifference to gender concerns, must now be deconstructed so that we can collectively reconstruct our respective societies. It cannot be, it is Professor Marcel Duyoya in 1989 who made the famous speech, "Let the bird fly." The bird cannot fly with one wing. Women now having the wing alone. The other wing of men is also needed. That's a critique of this African women theology. Should not be seen to be it is only women trying to speak about themselves. Who doesn't have a sister? Who doesn't have a mother? Who is not a byproduct of a woman somewhere? So everybody has a chance to study African women theology and teach it to everyone so that deconstruction and then reconstruction of society is done by all, not some. Exclusivism will make it an academic exercise, and they will keep agitating and winning, complaining endlessly. But if we team up and address African women theology together, it is another way of liberating the society for all. Another point I want to comment here as we critique it, there are some people in our modern day Africa who see gender activism as bothersome. Why? Probably because it has been associated with one gender, making unnecessary drama in social forums. If it is a worthwhile concern, if it's a concern that's worthwhile concern, why not involve everyone, just as past injustices such as slavery, slave trade, colonialism, civil rights, and apartheid were confronted by both men and women, and finally dismantled by all. Musa Dumbe appears to identify this concern when she narrates how she has encountered this misunderstanding. And I quote her once. Let me see what she says. In the workshops, some heads of departments have openly said, "Stop this gender nonsense." In some evaluations, some people wrote this was an excellent workshop, but you almost spoiled it with your gender nonsense. This resistance from theological leaders and educators means that our students who become religious and faith leaders graduate with no understanding of what gender inequalities are, how they work with the cultural, socio-economic, political, and spiritual institutions of our wounds to promote the spread of HIV and AIDS. End of quote. That is Musa Dube appreciating that there were even heads of department who are feeling these women are too much. They are really blaming us over everything. Clearly, African women theologies are theologies for all genders, as their concerns are geared towards building a fair and just society. Men, women, and children cannot be excluded in it. In any case, African women's theologies are too important to be left to one gender alone. It can't be left to one group of gender, women alone. If it's good for everyone. And if it's bad for everyone. It's a concern because we all have girl children. We also want them to see them live a better life. We also have a dream like King Hand that our girl children will walk in a society that takes care of everyone and doesn't discriminate on account of gender. Everybody has a dream and we have a dream. Conclusion. In their book, African Women, Religion and Health, Essays in Honor of Mercy Amber Eudziwa Oduyoye, Peter Marisburg, Cluster Publication 2006, edited by Isabel Apao-Pili and Salogina Nanda. African women theologians have spent their energies well by revealing Mercy the person, Mercy Oduyoye, as an icon of our times. In particular, Letty M. Luso, in her article, Mercy Amba Eudziwa Oduyoye, Wise Woman Bearing Gifts, is explicit that Mercy is our mother. This is, however, meant to portray her role in African women's theology, but a close look at her entire works as a scholar and an ecumenist shows that the founder of African women's theology is a mother of all people. As one of the few African mothers, she is a symbol of hope that Africa too has its good sources. Indeed, her international marriage to Modupe Oduyoye, while she is from Akan of Ghana, she married a Nigerian, clearly communicates not just a Pan-African message, but indeed is a communication. Africa is one, no boundaries. These post-barren boundaries that were set after partitioning and all that, they are mere geographical expressions. The real Africa can stand up. In the life of the founder of African women theologies, Mercy Amba Eudziwa Oduyoye, her life is inspirational to not just African women theologians and theologies, but to Africa as a whole, to men, women, and children. Like Kwame Nkrumah, who thought and acted African, Mercy Oduyoye equally does the same, a Pan-Africanist of our times, whose spirit will continue telling Africa to address her own disparities, so that together we may experience the foretaste of the kingdom of God. Thank you very much. But on the whole, let me say this. African women's theology, as has been propounded since 1989, is philosophically reconstructive in motive. That is very good to underline, so that we don't just end with Mercy alone, Mercy Oduyoye. So the motive is philosophically reconstructive. As with the African theology of reconstruction, its fundamental concerns include deconstruction of patriarchy, liberation from all neo-colonial forces, and the reconstruction of our broken socio-political, socio-religious society in terms of its anthropology, in terms of gender imbalances, in terms of poverty concerns, in terms of coronavirus pandemic and other pandemics that may come, in terms of the concern for HIV and AIDS, in terms of violence and domestic violence, in terms of concern for the environment and concern for a just society, among others. This shows that there is need for greater dialogue between the two post-Cold War African theologies. Thank you very much. Now.